example of British telecom technology.
Putting Britain ahead of the world, in touch with the world. British Telecom and its people.
The power behind the button.
It's coming closer, flames are now licking my body. Won't you help me? I feel like I'm slipping away. It's hard to breathe, my chest is heaving. Lord have mercy, I'm burning a hole where I lay. Touch your kisses lift me higher, like a sweet song of a choir. Light my morning skies, burning love. I'm just a hunk of burning love. I'm just a hunk of burning love. Yeah, I'm just a hunk of burning love. I'm just a hunk of burning love. Yeah, I'm just a hunk of burning love. 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 Yeah.
You saw what can happen when these little screens take over our lives.
One of the doctors featured in that report is from Metro Detroit, and he's studying how tablets and cell phones affect your child's brain.
Look what happens in a healthy child compared to someone with internet addiction. Gone.
The brain just shuts down.
Brain shuts down. And
7 Action News reporter Kim Russell takes us behind the scenes of an experiment all parents need to see.
We carry our cell phones everywhere, and they are an easy distraction, not only for adults, but for children. But is it dangerous? Right now, researchers at Children's Hospital and Wayne State are looking into that. Nice to meet you. Our executive producer, Jody Heisner, and her husband, Jeff, wanted to find out how tablet use impacts their children, Ella and Jackson. Once Ella and Jackson learned they'd get to play on a tablet for an experiment, they were in.
I love video games.
He would almost rather play on his tablet than do just about anything.
Psychiatrist Dr. David Rosenberg and psychologist Dr. Priya Tarmina hooked them up to sensors.
What will it do?
When people react to stuff, our sweat glands actually do stuff. And even if it's just a tiny bit, you don't have to be dripping with sweat, but even just a tiny little change, this sensor can pick up.
The sensors measure how stimulated they are doing different tasks.
Now you get to play it.
They found two things. The sensor showed the tablet is much more stimulating than other activities.
And this curve up here is what you see when she was actually playing a game that she enjoyed on an iPad.
And the children's mood changed. Ella, for example, went from exhausted to happy.
The first 2 times I was just kind of tired, and then after I played the game, the video game, it just kind of went away.
Games like this actually stimulate the reward center of your brain.
Their parents say Jackson gets upset and grumpy when tablet time is done.
So it causes a release of neurotransmitters that actually do make you feel better. They make you feel good, they make you feel awake.
But much to their parents' relief, Ella and Jackson are not addicted to technology. Their parents limit tablet time.
We do give them the tablets on the weekends, but you know, it's no more than a little bit here and a little bit there.
But in children that are addicted, researchers warn the way the brain works completely changes.
but look what happens in a healthy child compared to someone with internet addiction. Gone.
The brain just shuts down.
Brain shuts down, and its executive functioning is not working.
To Dr. Rosenberg, it looks familiar. It looks like a brain addicted to drugs.
When you look at an MRI of a brain using heroin and you look at an MRI of a brain that's hooked on tablets, what's the difference?
Overall, the disruption in the brain network is pretty similar.
Even if you think your children are addicted to technology, here's the good news. It's reversible. Take a look at this. This is the brain of a healthy person who is not addicted to the internet. Compare that to this, a picture of someone who is addicted. There is a lot less brain activity. But if that person goes on a digital fast, take a look. the brain heals.
Some of the people who are making the games are designing them deliberately to hook us on them and to get us addicted and not want to do anything else.
So how do you protect your children? It's all about getting help if you need it and having rules.
Do not let them use it before homework. Definitely do not let them use it during the week, but give it to them as a reward on weekends when everything's done.
I always tell parents that parenthood is not a democracy. At best, it's a benevolent dictatorship, and that we do have to take ownership.
Because technology, tablets, and phones are such a part of our culture, it's almost impossible to avoid them long term. So if it's an unhealthy habit you or your child is dealing with, doctors say don't hesitate to get help. Often it's caused by an underlying condition. But if that person goes on a digital fast, take a look.
Some of the people who are making the games are designing them deliberately to hook us on them and to get us addicted and not want to do anything else.
A recent study found 95% of Americans use cell phones. Now, California has put out groundbreaking guidelines to limit exposure to cell phone radiation. John Blackstone has more on this.
California officials say the warning about keeping a cell phone pressed up against your ear was issued largely because radio frequency emissions could be damaging, particularly to children.
Now, children on average are starting at the age of 10 and using cell phones for a lot of activities.
California's Department of Public Health recommends using the speakerphone or headphones, sleeping at least an arm's length away from it, and avoiding keeping it in your pocket. The move comes after a 3-year-long legal battle by Joel Moskowitz, who forced the state to release a long secret study of cell phone risk. Certainly there are those who say this is going to cause panic.
People are not going to give up these devices. That's not what we're seeking. What we're seeking is that people take the appropriate cautions and reduce their risk substantially.
California's warning says that while the science is still evolving, some studies suggest a link between high cell phone use and brain cancer, lower sperm count, and headaches.
This is just like the history of tobacco.
Now, unlike cigarettes, cell phones are actually useful for something.
Professor Stan Glantz uncovered long secret tobacco company research that revealed the dangers of smoking. He's watching the science on cell phones.
The case is by no means closed yet, but there's certainly enough evidence to be concerned, to the point that I don't usually carry a cell phone.
California is not alone in this warning. The Food and Drug Administration says on its website the risk is probably very small, but suggests using speaker mode or a headset. And Apple includes a warning of sorts on all iPhones, but it's not easy to find. You have to go to Settings, General, About, down to the bottom here to Legal, then to RF Exposure, where finally Apple suggests using headphones or the speakerphone to reduce exposure to radio frequency emissions. Jeff?
The case is by no means closed yet, but there's certainly enough evidence to be concerned.
Certainly there are those who say this is going to cause panic.
People are not going to give up these devices.
I didn't ask you to do that, Siri.
Delete confirmed.
Dr. Deborah Davis is a PhD, a noted toxicologist, expert on cancer, and the author of a new book called Disconnect. Deborah, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So Deborah, before we begin, or perhaps I should call you Dr. Davis, before we begin an analysis of your book, tell our audience about your professional qualifications, because I think your message, which is quite controversial, needs to be understood in the context of your experience as a doctor and researcher.
I worked at the National Academy of Sciences for 10 years as the founding director of the Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology. And in that capacity, I oversaw the production of reports on passive smoke and asbestos, for example. And when I first heard that cell phones could be a problem, I thought people saying that were out of their minds. I owned 3 phones at the time. But then I began to look at the evidence, and I found that the governments of Britain and Israel had already taken steps to issue warnings, and I thought maybe they were a little eccentric. The more I looked in it, the more I found things like this big fat book that literally weighs well over a pound. I've noticed that there really is a lot of information. First of all, cell phone radiation is too weak to damage DNA like X-rays, I realized, as did most scientists, therefore I thought it was safe. But even though it's too weak to damage like X-rays, it does cause damage. There are effects from the pulsed nature of the signal having nothing to do with the power of the signal. And right out of the bat, I realized that cell phones are two-way microwave radios. And I thought, what on earth is going on? The real turning point for me came when I saw my 8-month-old grandson be able to do little things with the phone. And I thought, what a clever child. And then I began to look at what that microwave radiation coming from the phone could do over the long haul. Now I realize nobody's going to die from holding a cell phone up to their head for a while. It's the long-term effect. It's the cumulative integrated dose under the curve, so to speak. We have to be concerned about, and it's not the power of the phone. It's the pulsed nature of the signal that may disturb resonance in all of our cells.
So, Deborah, you've written a book called Disconnect: The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation and what the industry is doing to hide it and how to protect your family. So, a couple of minutes on the truth about cell phone radiation.
Well,
for an audience that's probably 100% owning at least one, probably 2 or 3 cell phones.
Well, as I say, I owned 3 phones myself when I started out on this. I still own 2, and I use it all the time. It's very simple. You just need to practice safe phone. Distance is your friend. For every millimeter away from the brain or body you hold a phone, it's 15% less radiation that's getting into you. All phones work with symmetrical antennas. So the antenna, whether on this iPhone here, is radiating in a symmetrical way, not directional. Half of the radiation from a phone, according to studies done by industry, will get into your brain or body. That is why phones are actually only tested in 2 positions, with a spacer of 6 to 4 millimeters against the ear and with a holster on the hip. Phones are actually never tested in the way most of us use them. They're never tested in the pocket of the shirt or the pants. If they were, they emit 4 to 7 times more radiation. And the information I'm giving you is not coming from some left-wing group. It's coming from industry modeling studies done by distinguished researchers in Switzerland, in France, and formerly by Professor Gandhi at the University of Utah, who worked for Motorola for more than 30 years. He stopped working for Motorola when he produced this study showing that cell phone radiation gets more into the brain of a child than it does into the brain of an adult, almost double. When that work was published in 1996, he lost all of his funding for industry.
I think one of the most controversial parts of a very controversial book is your argument that the industry, the cell phone industry, is actively hiding what you say is the truth about cell phone radiation. What exactly is the industry doing?
Well, you know, they're not really hiding it. Here's what they're doing. If you go to the fine print warnings that you find with the iPhone, for example, in tiny print it says, if you keep it in your pocket, you can exceed the FCC exposure guidelines. If you go to the fine print warning for the BlackBerry, it says, hold it 0.98 inches from the body. And it also adds, avoid keeping it near the abdomen of pregnant women or teenagers. That's there. It's not really hidden. It's in 6-point type. The reason the city of San Francisco and the city of Berkeley have recently moved to require public information about this is because most of us have no idea that these warnings exist at all. And it's kind of a, you have the information there in the fine print, nobody reads it.
Is it the equivalent to smoking?
No, it's not, and I'll tell you why. Cell phones have changed the world in a lot of positive ways. They've radically improved our ability to respond to emergencies. They keep us connected, whether we want to be or not. And they have a lot of positive functions. Tobacco did not have a positive function, except to make tobacco farmers rich, and for a while to drive the economies of Britain and the United States, because the revenues from tobacco were so great. Cell phones have positive roles. So where there is a parallel, however, is in the effect of the industry to try to keep this information under wraps.
It's clearly working. Today, wherever we go, we're inevitably surrounded by fellow citizens staring into their phones, as we usually are too.
Turn it off. That's what I would say. It's hard for young people now because they're hooked. They're addicted. If you don't think you're addicted, and I'm talking about anyone, from the highest to the lowest, if you don't think you're addicted, then see if you can turn it off for a week.
If you don't think you're addicted, and I'm talking about anyone, from the highest to the lowest, if you don't think you're addicted, then see if you can turn it off for a week.